Sarah Martinez walked through the glass doors of Thompson Industries on a crisp Monday morning in October. At 32, she carried herself with a quiet confidence that most people mistook for shyness. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a modest navy blazer with black slacks. Nothing about her appearance suggested the extraordinary life she had lived before stepping into the corporate world. The receptionist, a young woman named Kelly with perfectly manicured nails and a bright smile, looked up from her computer. "You must be Sarah, our new logistics coordinator. Welcome to Thompson Industries." Sarah nodded politely. "Thank you. I'm looking forward to getting started. Mr. Davidson will show you around. He's the department manager." Kelly pressed a button on her phone. "David, the new girl is here." The phrase "new girl" made Sarah's jaw tighten slightly, but she kept her expression neutral. In her previous life, she had been called many things, but never girl in a way that diminished her capabilities. David Davidson emerged from a corner office, a man in his late 40s with thinning hair and a permanent frown. He wore an expensive suit that seemed too tight around his middle, and his handshake was deliberately firm, as if he was trying to establish dominance from the first moment. "Sarah, right? I hope you can keep up. This isn't like other places you might have worked. We move fast here, and we don't have time to hold hands." His eyes scanned her from head to toe in a way that made her uncomfortable. "I understand completely," Sarah replied, her voice steady. "I'm here to work." Davidson led her through the office, pointing out different departments with barely concealed impatience. The logistics department occupied a large open floor with dozens of cubicles. Most of the employees were men, and Sarah noticed how conversations seemed to pause as they walked by. "This is where you'll sit," Davidson said, stopping at a small cubicle near the back of the room. The desk was cramped, with an old computer and a chair that had seen better days. Around her, the other workstations were more spacious and better equipped. "The work is simple enough even for someone like you," Davidson continued. "You'll be tracking shipments, updating inventory systems, and handling customer complaints. Think you can manage that?" Sarah looked at the computer setup and the stack of files on the desk. In her previous career, she had coordinated complex operations involving multiple teams across dangerous territories, managed million-dollar equipment, and made split-second decisions that affected the lives of her teammates. Managing logistics for a mid-sized manufacturing company would not challenge her in the slightest. "I'm confident I can handle the responsibilities," she said simply. Davidson smirked. "We'll see about that. Jenkins will show you the ropes." Tom Jenkins approached from a nearby cubicle. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s with coffee stains on his shirt and a friendly demeanor that seemed genuine. Unlike Davidson, his handshake was normal, and he smiled warmly. "Don't mind Davidson," Jenkins whispered as their boss walked away. "He's like that with everyone new, especially women. He thinks this is still 1985. Jenkins spent the morning showing Sarah the computer systems and explaining the daily procedures. The work was straightforward, involving tracking shipments from suppliers, updating delivery schedules, and responding to customer inquiries about their orders. "You seem to pick this up pretty quickly," Jenkins observed as Sarah navigated through the inventory system with ease. "Most people take at least a week to get comfortable with our software." "I'm good with systems," Sarah replied. "Once you understand the logic behind them, they're not complicated." What she didn't mention was that she had worked with far more complex systems under intense pressure. The logistics software at Thompson Industries was child's play compared to the tactical communication systems and real-time coordination platforms she had mastered. During her 8 years as a Navy SEAL, by lunchtime, Sarah had already identified several inefficiencies in their current processes. She noticed that shipments were often delayed because of poor communication between departments, and the inventory tracking system had several gaps that could lead to costly mistakes. During her lunch break, she sat alone in the company cafeteria, eating a simple sandwich and observing the social dynamics around her. The office clearly had its hierarchies and cliques. Davidson held court at one table, loudly discussing weekend golf games with several other managers. The younger employees clustered together, talking about television shows and weekend plans. A few women from the accounting department sat at a nearby table, and Sarah caught fragments of their conversation about the challenges of being taken seriously in the male-dominated company culture. Davidson actually told me last week that I should smile more during meetings, one woman was saying, as if my facial expression affects my ability to analyze financial reports. Sarah understood their frustration more than they could imagine. During her military career, she had faced similar attitudes from some colleagues who couldn't see past her gender. The difference was that in the military, performance ultimately spoke louder than prejudice. In combat situations, no one cared about gender when lives were on the line. After lunch, Davidson assigned Sarah to handle a particularly difficult customer complaint. A major client was threatening to cancel their contract because of repeated delivery delays and damaged shipments. "This account is worth $500,000 annually," Davidson said, dropping a thick file on her desk. "The customer is furious, and our previous attempts to resolve this have failed. Fix it, or we might have to reconsider whether you're the right fit for this position." Sarah opened the file and began reviewing the case details. The customer had experienced 6 delayed shipments in the past 3 months, with 3 of those deliveries arriving with damaged products. The previous logistics coordinator had repeatedly apologized but had never addressed the root cause of the problems. Within 2 hours, Sarah had identified the issue. The shipping company they used for this particular route had changed their handling procedures without notifying Thompson Industries. The new process involved an additional transfer point that increased the risk of damage and delays. She contacted alternative shipping companies, negotiated better rates with improved handling guarantees, and prepared a comprehensive recovery plan for the customer. Then she called the client directly. "Mr. Peterson, this is Sarah Martinez from Thompson Industries. I'm calling about the issues you've experienced with your recent shipments." The conversation lasted 30 minutes. Peterson was initially skeptical and angry, but Sarah's calm professionalism and detailed solutions gradually won him over. By the end of the call, he had agreed to continue the contract with the new shipping arrangements. Davidson was surprised when Sarah presented her solution before the end of her first day. "You actually got Peterson to stay?" he asked, incredulity clear in his voice. "The problem wasn't complex," Sarah explained. "It just needed someone to look at the entire supply chain rather than treating each incident as isolated." As 5 o'clock approached, Sarah gathered her things to leave. She had successfully completed her first day, but she sensed that the real challenges were yet to come. Davidson's attitude suggested he would be looking for any excuse to prove that hiring her had been a mistake. Walking to her car, Sarah reflected on how different this environment was from her previous life. In the military, respect was earned through competence and courage. Here, it seemed like respect was something that had to be fought for in entirely different ways. She drove home to her small apartment, already planning how she would excel in this new chapter of her life, unaware that her past would soon collide with her present in ways she never expected. 3 weeks into her new job, Sarah had quietly transformed the efficiency of Thompson Industries' logistics department. Her methodical approach and attention to detail had reduced shipping errors by 30% and improved customer satisfaction scores significantly. However, her success was beginning to create unexpected problems. Davidson stood at her cubicle on a Wednesday morning, his face red with frustration. "Martinez, I need to talk to you in my office, now." Sarah followed him, noting the stares from her coworkers. Davidson's office was decorated with golf trophies and photos of himself with various business associates. He gestured for her to sit in the chair across from his desk, then closed the door firmly. "We have a problem," he began, pacing behind his desk. "Yesterday I got a call from Regional. They're asking questions about our sudden improvement in performance metrics. They want to know what changed." Sarah waited for him to continue, unsure why this was being presented as a problem. "The thing is, Martinez, it makes my previous management look incompetent. I've been running this department for 8 years, and suddenly a new employee shows up and everything improves overnight. That doesn't look good for me. The real issue became clear. Davidson wasn't angry about the improvements themselves, but about how those improvements reflected on his leadership. Sir, I've only been implementing basic process improvements. The team has been very capable. They just needed some organizational adjustments, Sarah said diplomatically. Davidson sat down heavily in his chair. Here's what's going to happen. I want you to slow down. Stop making so many suggestions. Stop fixing problems so quickly. Let things develop naturally. Sarah stared at him, struggling to process what she was hearing. In her military career, initiative and problem-solving had been encouraged and rewarded. The idea of deliberately performing below her capabilities felt fundamentally wrong. I'm not sure I understand. You want me to work less efficiently? I want you to work like everyone else, Davidson snapped. You're making the rest of the team look bad, and that creates problems for me. You're supposed to be part of a team, not some kind of superhero. After the meeting, Sarah returned to her desk feeling frustrated and confused. Tom Jenkins noticed her expression and approached quietly. Rough meeting? He asked sympathetically. Something like that, Sarah replied, not wanting to discuss the details. Let me guess. Davidson told you to slow down, stop showing off, maybe blend in more? Jenkins shook his head. He did the same thing to the last person who tried to improve things around here. Some managers don't like change, even when it's obviously better. That afternoon, Sarah tried to follow Davidson's instructions. She worked more slowly, avoided suggesting improvements, and let small inefficiencies slide by without comment. It felt like deliberately sabotaging herself, and every instinct she had developed over years of training rebelled against it. The situation worsened over the following days. Davidson began scrutinizing her work more closely, looking for any excuse to criticize her performance. He questioned her decisions in front of other employees, made snide comments about her suggestions during meetings, and generally tried to undermine her confidence. Martinez. This delivery schedule doesn't look right, he announced loudly during a department meeting, holding up a report she had prepared. Are you sure someone with your limited experience should be handling our most important accounts? Sarah had triple-checked the schedule and she knew it was accurate. Several of her co-workers looked uncomfortable with Davidson's public criticism, but no one spoke up. The schedule is correct, sir. I can walk you through the calculations if you'd like, Sarah replied calmly. That won't be necessary, Davidson said dismissively. Just be more careful in the future. The pattern continued for weeks. Davidson would assign Sarah the most difficult tasks, hoping she would fail, but she consistently delivered excellent results. This only seemed to increase his frustration and make him more determined to find fault with her work. The situation reached a new low during the company's monthly all-hands meeting. The conference room was packed with employees from all departments, and the CEO was presenting quarterly results. When he mentioned the logistics department's improved performance, Davidson quickly took credit. Our team has really come together this quarter, Davidson announced, standing up to address the room. Through strong leadership and focused management, we've achieved some outstanding results. Sarah sat quietly in the back of the room, watching Davidson accept praise for improvements he had actually tried to prevent. Several of her coworkers glanced in her direction, knowing the truth but unwilling to challenge their manager publicly. After the meeting, Sarah was walking back to her desk when she heard Davidson talking to another manager in the hallway. The problem with hiring women, Davidson was saying, his voice carrying clearly, is that they either can't handle the pressure, or they get too aggressive trying to prove themselves. This new one is definitely in the second category. Sarah stopped walking, feeling a familiar surge of anger that she hadn't experienced since leaving the military. In her previous life, she had faced enemy fire, made life-or-death decisions under extreme stress, and earned the respect of some of the toughest warriors in the world. Being dismissed as too aggressive for doing excellent work felt like a particularly cruel insult. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment considering her options. She could continue enduring Davidson's harassment, hoping that her work would eventually speak for itself. She could file a complaint with Human Resources, though she suspected Davidson's connections in the company would protect him. Or she could simply find another job and start over somewhere else. None of these options felt satisfying. In the military, problems were confronted directly and resolved through clear chains of command and established protocols. The corporate world seemed to operate by different rules, where politics and personalities often mattered more than competence and results. The next morning brought a new challenge. Sarah arrived at work to find that Davidson had moved her to a different cubicle, one that was smaller and located directly outside his office where he could monitor her constantly. "I thought it would be helpful for you to be closer to management," Davidson explained with a thin smile. "That way, if you have any questions or need guidance, I'll be right here to help." The message was clear. Sarah was being watched, scrutinized, and controlled. The new seating arrangement also made it difficult for her to collaborate with other team members, effectively isolating her from her colleagues. Jenkins stopped by her new desk during lunch break, glancing around to make sure Davidson wasn't watching. "This is getting ridiculous," he said quietly. "Everyone knows you're the reason our numbers have improved, but Davidson is making your life miserable." "It's fine," Sarah replied, though her expression suggested otherwise. "I can handle it." "Maybe you can, but you shouldn't have to. There are laws against this kind of treatment, you know. If you ever want to talk to someone about filing a complaint, I know people in HR who would listen." Sarah appreciated Jenkins' support, but she wasn't ready to escalate the situation. She had dealt with difficult superiors before, though never quite like this. In the military, even the most demanding commanders had ultimately respected competence and dedication. Davidson seemed threatened by those very qualities. As the weeks passed, Sarah began to notice that other employees were starting to treat her differently. Some avoided her, apparently not wanting to be associated with someone who was clearly in Davidson's crosshairs. Others looked at her with sympathy but said nothing, unwilling to risk their own positions by defending her. The isolation was perhaps the most difficult part. Sarah had always been self-reliant, but she was accustomed to being part of a team where mutual support and trust were fundamental values. The corporate environment felt cold and competitive in ways she hadn't expected. One afternoon, while Sarah was working on a particularly complex shipping problem, Davidson approached her desk with two other managers from different departments. "Martinez, I want you to explain to Mr. Johnson and Miss Davis how you've been handling the Peterson account," Davidson said, his tone suggesting this was some kind of test. Sarah provided a clear, professional explanation of the solutions she had implemented. Johnson and Davis nodded approvingly, clearly impressed with her thoroughness and results. "Outstanding work," Johnson said. "We should implement similar approaches in our department." After they left, Davidson's expression was darker than ever. Sarah realized that his plan to embarrass her had backfired, only further highlighting her competence and his own insecurity. That evening, Sarah went for a long run through her neighborhood, trying to clear her head and decide how much more of this treatment she was willing to endure. She had survived far worse challenges, but those had always had a clear purpose and end goal. This felt different. This felt personal and petty in ways that combat never had. She was beginning to understand that some battles couldn't be won through skill and determination alone. The morning of November 15th started like any other, but it would end with Sarah facing a situation that would test everything she had learned about restraint and self-control since leaving the military. Sarah arrived at Thompson Industries to find Davidson waiting by her cubicle with a satisfied smirk on his face. Next to him stood Rebecca Shun from Human Resources, holding a manila folder and wearing an uncomfortable expression. "Martinez, we need to discuss your performance," Davidson announced loudly enough for the entire department to hear. "Conference room now." As they walked toward the conference room, Sarah noticed her coworkers watching with a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. Jenkins caught her eye and mouthed, "Good luck." But there was nothing he could do to help. The conference room was small and windowless, with fluorescent lighting that cast harsh shadows on everyone's faces. Davidson sat across from Sarah, while Rebecca positioned herself at the head of the table with her folder open. Sarah, we've received some concerning feedback about your integration with the team, Rebecca began, reading from a prepared statement. There have been complaints about your attitude and your unwillingness to collaborate effectively with colleagues and management. Sarah kept her expression neutral, though internally she was analyzing the situation like she would any tactical problem. Davidson had clearly orchestrated this meeting, using HR as a weapon while protecting himself behind corporate policies and procedures. I wasn't aware there were any issues with my collaboration, Sarah replied calmly. Could you provide specific examples? Davidson leaned forward eagerly. Your attitude has been consistently problematic. You question decisions, you act like you know better than people who have been here for years, and you make other employees uncomfortable with your aggressive approach to problem solving. I've focused on doing my job effectively and helping the company achieve better results, Sarah said. I haven't questioned any decisions inappropriately, and I've tried to work constructively with everyone. That's exactly what I'm talking about, Davidson interrupted. You're argumentative and defensive. You can't accept feedback or criticism. Rebecca looked increasingly uncomfortable as the meeting progressed. She had clearly been briefed by Davidson, but Sarah's calm professionalism was making it difficult to justify the complaints. There's also been concern about your background, Davidson continued, pulling out a sheet of paper. Your resume shows a gap in traditional corporate experience. Some people wonder if you're really qualified for this position. Sarah's military service wasn't a secret, but she had deliberately kept the details private. Most of her co-workers knew she was a veteran, but they didn't know the specifics of her service or her qualifications. Davidson's comment felt like a deliberate provocation. My qualifications were thoroughly reviewed during the hiring process, Sarah replied. My performance over the past 6 weeks has demonstrated my ability to handle the responsibilities of this position. Performance isn't just about numbers, Davidson shot back. It's about fitting in, being part of a team, and respecting the chain of command. Maybe in the military you could get away with being difficult, but this is the real world. The casual dismissal of her military service as somehow less than the real world triggered something deep in Sarah's psyche. For 8 years, she had served in some of the most dangerous and demanding situations imaginable. She had led teams, saved lives, and made sacrifices that Davidson couldn't even comprehend. I understand teamwork and chain of command very well, Sarah said, her voice remaining steady despite the anger building inside her. I've always respected both in my time here. Then explain why you consistently try to undermine my authority, Davidson demanded. Why you act like your ideas are better than established procedures. Why you make everyone else look bad by constantly trying to show off? Sarah realized that no matter how she responded, Davidson was determined to paint her as the problem. This wasn't about her performance or her attitude. This was about an insecure man who felt threatened by her competence and was using his position to punish her for it. I've never tried to undermine anyone, Sarah said. I've simply done my job to the best of my ability. Davidson slammed his hand on the table. That's the problem right there. You think your ability is so much better than everyone else's. You think you're special because of your military background. Well, let me tell you something. Nobody here cares about your war stories or your tough girl act. The room fell silent. Rebecca looked shocked by Davidson's outburst, and Sarah felt something cold and dangerous settle in her chest. She had been called many things during her military career, but no one had ever dismissed her service so contemptuously. I've never shared any war stories or acted tough, Sarah replied quietly. I've simply tried to do good work and contribute to the team's success. Right, Davidson sneered. And I suppose that explains why you think you're better than everyone else. Maybe where you came from, people were impressed by women trying to act like men, but here we expect professionalism and humility. Sarah's hands clenched involuntarily under the table. The comment about women trying to act like men was particularly offensive, echoing attitudes she had fought against throughout her military career. She had earned her place among the SEALs through merit, skill, and dedication, not through any special consideration or lowered standards. Rebecca finally found her voice. David, I think we should focus on specific workplace behaviors rather than personal backgrounds. This is about workplace behavior, Davidson insisted. She doesn't fit in here, and it's creating problems for everyone. Maybe she should find somewhere else to work where her attitude would be more appreciated. Sarah understood that Davidson was essentially trying to force her to quit. He couldn't fire her without cause, but he could make her working life so miserable that she would choose to leave voluntarily. I have no intention of leaving, Sarah said firmly. I enjoy my work here, and I believe I'm making a valuable contribution to the company. Davidson's face reddened further. That's exactly what I mean. You're stubborn and argumentative. You refuse to accept feedback or guidance. You think you know better than everyone else? I accept appropriate feedback, Sarah replied. But I won't accept harassment or discrimination disguised as management. The word discrimination seemed to hit Davidson like a physical blow. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. Now you're threatening me? He shouted. You think you can come in here and throw around accusations? This is exactly why women like you don't belong in positions like this. You can't handle normal workplace dynamics without crying discrimination. Rebecca was frantically taking notes, clearly recognizing that the meeting had spiraled completely out of control. Davidson's comments were creating a legal liability for the company, and she was witnessing it firsthand. Sarah stood up slowly, her movements controlled and precise. For a moment, Davidson's expression changed as something in her posture triggered an instinctive recognition of danger. She was no longer just an employee he could bully. She was something else entirely. Mr. Davidson, Sarah said, her voice quiet but carrying an unmistakable authority. I suggest you reconsider your next words very carefully. The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Davidson took an involuntary step backward. Suddenly aware that he had pushed too far and awakened something he didn't understand, Rebecca stood up quickly. I think we should end this meeting and reconvene when everyone has had time to cool down. But Davidson, perhaps driven by adrenaline and wounded pride, made one final mistake. Don't try to intimidate me, Martinez. I don't care what kind of tough guy training you had. This isn't some third world country where you can solve problems with violence. This is America, and here we handle things professionally. Sarah's training kicked in automatically. Years of discipline and self-control were the only things that kept her from responding to Davidson's provocation in the way her instincts demanded. She had been trained to assess threats, neutralize dangers, and protect herself and others. But she had also been trained to know when force was appropriate and when it wasn't. Instead of reacting physically, Sarah did something that was perhaps even more devastating. She smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile or an amused smile. It was the cold, confident smile of someone who had faced real danger and emerged victorious. It was the smile of someone who knew exactly how dangerous she was, and exactly how much restraint she was choosing to exercise. Davidson's face went pale. Without saying another word, Sarah gathered her things and walked out of the conference room, leaving behind two people who were just beginning to realize they had seriously underestimated who they were dealing with. The war had been declared, and Sarah Martinez was no longer pretending to be just another office worker. Word of the disastrous meeting spread through Thompson Industries faster than wildfire. By the end of that day, conflicting versions of the story had reached every department, with details becoming more dramatic with each retelling. Some said Sarah had threatened Davidson. Others claimed Davidson had completely lost control and screamed at her. The truth, as usual, lay somewhere in between. Rebecca Chun spent the rest of the afternoon in emergency meetings with the company's legal counsel and senior management. Davidson's comments during the meeting had created a significant liability exposure for the company, and everyone involved knew it. Sarah, meanwhile, had returned to her desk and continued working as if nothing had happened, which somehow made the situation even more unsettling. Tom Jenkins was the first to approach her after the meeting. "Sarah, are you okay?" he asked quietly, glancing around to make sure Davidson wasn't watching. People are saying some pretty crazy things about what happened in there. I'm fine, Sarah replied, not looking up from her computer screen. It was just a misunderstanding. But Jenkins had worked in corporate environments long enough to recognize when someone was exercising extraordinary self-control. Sarah's calm demeanor wasn't natural. It was the kind of forced composure that came from years of training and discipline. Look, I don't know what your background is, Jenkins continued, but I know Davidson crossed a line today. If you want to file a complaint, I'll back you up. So will half the people in this department. Sarah finally looked up from her computer. I appreciate that, Tom, really, but I can handle this situation myself. Something in her tone made Jenkins take a step back. It wasn't threatening, but it carried an absolute certainty that was somehow more intimidating than any aggressive posture could have been. Meanwhile, Rebecca was conducting damage control. She had already briefed the CEO about the meeting, and they had agreed that immediate action was necessary to protect the company from potential litigation. David, we need to discuss what happened today, Rebecca said as she entered Davidson's office later that afternoon. Your comments during the meeting with Sarah Martinez were completely inappropriate and potentially actionable. Davidson was still angry and defensive. She was being insubordinate and argumentative. I was just trying to establish proper boundaries. You made comments about her gender, her military service, and suggested she didn't belong in the position because she's a woman. Those aren't boundaries, David. Those are discriminatory statements that could cost the company millions in a lawsuit. For the first time, Davidson seemed to realize the severity of his situation. I was frustrated. She brings out the worst in people with her attitude. Her attitude isn't the issue here, Rebecca said firmly. Your behavior is. We're going to need to implement immediate remedial measures, starting with mandatory sensitivity training. While these conversations were happening, Sarah was quietly conducting her own investigation. Using her access to the company's systems, she began documenting every interaction she had had with Davidson, every email exchange, and every witness to his behavior. Her military training had taught her the importance of intelligence gathering, and she approached this corporate conflict with the same methodical precision she had once used to plan tactical operations. The next morning brought unexpected developments. Sarah arrived at work to find a new face in the department, James Morrison, a senior manager from the corporate office who had been temporarily assigned to review departmental procedures. Morrison was a tall, distinguished man in his 50s with graying temples and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. He introduced himself to the entire department during the morning meeting. I'll be working with your team for the next few weeks to evaluate current processes and identify opportunities for improvement, Morrison announced. Please continue with your normal duties and don't hesitate to bring any concerns or suggestions to my attention. Davidson sat through the announcement with barely concealed anger, clearly understanding that Morrison's presence was a direct result of the previous day's incident. After the meeting, Morrison approached Sarah's desk. Miss Martinez, could I speak with you privately? I'd like to get your perspective on the department's current operations. They walked to a small conference room, and Morrison closed the door carefully before speaking. I want you to know that your meeting yesterday with Mr. Davidson and Ms. Chin has been reported to senior management, Morrison said. We take allegations of workplace harassment and discrimination very seriously. Sarah nodded but remained cautious. I haven't made any formal allegations. No, but Ms. Chun documented everything that was said, and her report raises serious concerns about Mr. Davidson's conduct. Morrison studied her carefully. I've also had a chance to review your personnel file and your performance metrics. Your work has been exceptional. I try to do my best, Sarah replied simply. Morrison leaned forward slightly. Miss Martinez, I'm going to be direct with you. Your background is somewhat unusual for this type of position. 8 years in the Navy, with what appears to be specialized training. But your resume doesn't provide many details about your actual duties. Sarah's expression remained neutral, but she could sense that Morrison was fishing for information. My military service was in logistics and operations coordination. The skills transfer well to civilian supply chain management. It wasn't technically a lie, but it was a significant understatement of her actual experience. Morrison seemed to sense there was more to the story. I'm sure they do. I'm curious, though, about the gap between your discharge and your employment here. What were you doing for those 6 months? Personal time, Sarah said. Transitioning to civilian life and deciding what career path I wanted to pursue. What she didn't mention was that those 6 months had been spent in intensive therapy, dealing with PTSD and the psychological challenges of readjusting to a world where split-second life-or-death decisions weren't a daily reality. Morrison seemed to accept her explanation. But Sarah sensed he was storing the information for later consideration. Well, regardless of your background, your performance here has been impressive. I want you to know that the company values employees who demonstrate initiative and excellence. Over the following days, Morrison conducted interviews with every member of the department. The pattern that emerged was consistent. Sarah was respected by her colleagues for her competence and professionalism, while Davidson was increasingly seen as an obstacle to the team's effectiveness. Jenkins was particularly vocal during his interview with Morrison. Sarah's the best thing that's happened to this department in years, he said. She solved problems that have been dragging us down for months. Davidson's been trying to undermine her since day one, and frankly, it's affecting everyone's morale. Other employees shared similar sentiments, though some were more cautious about criticizing Davidson directly. The picture that emerged was of a talented employee being systematically harassed by an insecure manager who felt threatened by her capabilities. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her own quiet investigation. She had identified several other female employees who had experienced similar treatment from Davidson over the years. 2 had eventually transferred to other departments, and 1 had left the company entirely after filing an unsuccessful complaint with HR. The pattern was clear. Davidson had a history of targeting competent women and making their working lives miserable until they chose to leave rather than fight back. But Sarah wasn't going to leave. She had found something at Thompson Industries that she hadn't expected, a sense of purpose and accomplishment that reminded her of the best aspects of her military service. The work itself wasn't as challenging as combat operations, but the opportunity to solve complex problems and lead positive change was deeply satisfying. On Friday of that week, Sarah was working late when she noticed Davidson approaching her desk. The office was nearly empty, with only a few employees remaining to finish urgent projects. "Martinez, we need to talk," Davidson said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "What can I do for you?" Sarah replied, not looking up from her computer. "You think you're pretty smart, don't you? Bringing in corporate to investigate me, making me look bad with all your performance metrics and process improvements." Sarah finally looked up, meeting Davidson's angry gaze with calm assessment. "I didn't bring in anyone. I've simply been doing my job." "Don't play innocent with me," Davidson hissed, stepping closer to her desk. "I know what you're doing. You're trying to get me fired so you can take over my position." "That's not accurate," Sarah said quietly. "I have no interest in your position." Davidson's face was flushed with anger and frustration. "You military types are all the same? You think civilian rules don't apply to you? You think you can just steamroll over everyone with your superior attitudes?" Sarah stood up slowly, and once again, Davidson instinctively stepped backward as something in her posture triggered a primal warning. "Mr. Davidson," Sarah said, her voice quiet but carrying unmistakable authority, "you don't know anything about my military service or what I've done. You don't know what I'm capable of, and you don't know what I've sacrificed. But I'm going to give you some free advice. Stop making assumptions about people you don't understand." The weekend gave everyone time to reflect, but it also gave James Morrison time to make some phone calls. Something about Sarah Martinez didn't add up, and his instincts told him there was much more to her story than appeared on her resume. Morrison had spent 15 years in corporate security before moving into operations management, and he had learned to read people and situations with considerable accuracy. Sarah's calm under pressure, her methodical approach to problem solving, and especially her reaction to Davidson's provocations suggested training and experience that went far beyond standard military logistics. On Monday morning, Morrison made a call to a contact at the Department of Veterans Affairs. "I need some background information on a former service member," Morrison explained. "Sarah Martinez, discharged 6 months ago. Her resume's logistics and operations coordination, but I suspect there's more to the story." "I can't give you specific details about someone's service record," his contact replied. "But if you give me her full name and approximate service dates, I might be able to tell you if there are any general categories of information that would be relevant to an employment screening." Morrison provided the information and waited. 20 minutes later, his phone rang. "Morrison, you need to be very careful with this one," his contact said, his voice serious. "I can't tell you specifics, but this person's service record is classified at levels that require special clearance to access. Whatever she did in the Navy, it wasn't standard logistics." The implications hit Morrison immediately. Highly classified service records, specialized training, 8 years of service ending with an honorable discharge, but no specific details about duties or deployments. It all pointed toward special operations. Meanwhile, Sarah was dealing with her own Monday morning challenges. She arrived at work to find a formal letter from Human Resources requesting her presence at another meeting, this time with Morrison present alongside Rebecca Shunn. The meeting was scheduled for 10 o'clock, giving Sarah 2 hours to prepare. She used the time to review her own documentation of Davidson's behavior and to mentally rehearse how much of her background she was prepared to reveal when the meeting began. The atmosphere was notably different from the previous week's disaster. Morrison conducted himself with professional courtesy. Rebecca was clearly better prepared, and Davidson was conspicuously absent. "Ms. Martinez, thank you for joining us," Morrison began. "We're conducting a comprehensive review of recent incidents in the logistics department, and we want to ensure we have a complete understanding of the situation from all perspectives." "I'm happy to help however I can," Sarah replied. Rebecca consulted her notes. "We've documented several instances where Mr. Davidson's management style appears to have created a hostile work environment. We'd like your account of these interactions." Sarah provided a detailed, factual recounting of her experiences with Davidson. She stuck to observable behaviors and documented incidents, avoiding emotional language or personal interpretations. Her presentation was so thorough and well organized that Morrison began to suspect his theories about her background were correct. "You've been very methodical in documenting these incidents," Morrison observed. "Most employees don't maintain such detailed records of workplace interactions." "I believe in being prepared," Sarah replied simply. "In my experience, having accurate information is essential when dealing with complex situations." Morrison leaned forward slightly. "Ms. Martinez, I'd like to discuss your background a bit more. Your resume mentions military service, but it's rather general in its descriptions. Could you provide more specific information about your duties and training?" Sarah had expected this question, but she was still careful in her response. "I served in Naval Special Operations, primarily in logistics and coordination roles supporting deployed units. Much of my service involved classified operations, so I'm limited in what details I can discuss." The room fell silent. Rebecca's eyes widened as she began to understand the implications, and Morrison nodded slowly as his suspicions were confirmed. "Naval Special Operations," Morrison repeated. "That would explain your approach to problem solving and your composure under pressure. My military training emphasized systematic analysis and measured responses to challenging situations." Sarah acknowledged. Morrison exchanged a glance with Rebecca before continuing. "Miss Martinez, given your background and the nature of the incidents we've been discussing, I want to ask you directly, do you feel that you've been subjected to discrimination or harassment based on your gender or military service?" It was the question Sarah had been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. A formal complaint would trigger investigations, legal procedures, and public attention that she preferred to avoid. But staying silent would allow Davidson's behavior to continue unchecked. I believe Mr. Davidson's treatment of me has been inappropriate and unprofessional, Sarah said carefully. Whether it constitutes legal harassment or discrimination would be for others to determine. But you do feel that you've been treated differently because you're a woman and a veteran? Rebecca pressed. Sarah considered her words carefully. I believe Mr. Davidson is uncomfortable with women who don't conform to his expectations, and I believe he views military service as somehow irrelevant to civilian work. Yes, I think those factors have influenced his behavior toward me. Morrison made notes as she spoke. Have you considered filing a formal complaint? I've considered it, Sarah admitted. But I prefer to focus on doing my job well rather than getting involved in legal proceedings. That's admirable, Morrison said, but it's not always practical. Sometimes situations require formal intervention to prevent them from escalating or affecting other employees. Rebecca nodded in agreement. We've already identified at least 2 other female employees who have experienced similar treatment from Mr. Davidson. This appears to be a pattern of behavior, rather than an isolated incident. Sarah wasn't surprised by this revelation, given her own research into Davidson's history. What happens next? Morrison closed his folder. We're going to recommend that Mr. Davidson be removed from his management position pending a full investigation. In the meantime, I'll be overseeing the department's operations. And what about potential retaliation? Sarah asked. It was a practical question born from experience with organizational politics. The company has strict policies against retaliation, Rebecca assured her. And given Mr. Morrison's presence and the attention this situation has received at the corporate level, any attempt at retaliation would be dealt with immediately and severely. After the meeting, Sarah returned to her desk feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. The immediate threat from Davidson had been neutralized, but she knew that resolving the situation formally would bring unwanted attention to her background and service record. Morrison stopped by her cubicle an hour later. Miss Martinez, could I speak with you privately for a moment? They walked to his temporary office, and Morrison closed the door. I want you to know that I've done some checking on your background, Morrison said directly. I understand that your service record is classified, and I'm not asking for details about specific operations or deployments. Sarah remained silent, waiting to see where the conversation was heading. But I think it's important for the company to understand what kind of employee we have in you, Morrison continued. Your skills and experience level are clearly much higher than your current position would typically require. I'm content with my current role, Sarah replied diplomatically. Morrison smiled. I'm sure you are. But the company would be foolish not to recognize and utilize your capabilities more effectively. Have you considered pursuing advancement opportunities here? It was an intriguing possibility. Sarah had assumed that her military background might actually limit her advancement in the corporate world, but Morrison seemed to view it as an asset. I haven't thought much about advancement, Sarah said honestly. I'm still adjusting to civilian work environments. Well, I'd encourage you to think about it, Morrison said, particularly once we resolve this situation with Davidson. The company needs people with your combination of skills and character in leadership positions. That afternoon, word spread through the office that Davidson had been temporarily reassigned to special projects pending an investigation. The news was met with a mixture of relief and nervous excitement among the logistics staff. Jenkins was the first to approach Sarah after the announcement. So, rumor has it that Davidson's been sidelined, he said with obvious satisfaction. I'm guessing your meeting this morning went better than last week's disaster. The situation is being handled appropriately, Sarah replied neutrally. Jenkins studied her expression. You know, I've been thinking about something. The way you handled Davidson's harassment, the way you document everything, the way you stay calm under pressure, it reminds me of my brother-in-law. He was military police before he got into corporate security. Military training emphasizes discipline and systematic approaches to problems, Sarah acknowledged. Yeah, but this feels different, Jenkins continued. My brother-in-law was tough, but you're something else entirely. Davidson backed down from you like he was scared, and Davidson isn't scared of anyone. Sarah looked up from her computer. The formal investigation into Davidson's conduct moved quickly once corporate lawyers became involved. Within a week, Morrison had interviewed every employee in the logistics department, reviewed years of personnel files, and uncovered a pattern of discriminatory behavior that extended far beyond Sarah's experiences, but the investigation also triggered something Sarah had hoped to avoid: increased scrutiny of her own background. On Thursday morning, she received a call at work from an unexpected source. "Ms. Martinez, this is Admiral Patricia Walsh from Naval Personnel Command. I need to speak with you about recent inquiries regarding your service record." Sarah felt her stomach tighten. "What kind of inquiries, ma'am?" "Your current employer has been asking questions through official channels about your classification status and service details. While they haven't been granted access to specifics, their persistent requests have flagged your file for review." Sarah understood immediately. Morrison's investigation had gone beyond casual background checks. And now the Navy was taking notice. "Ma'am, I haven't disclosed any classified information or violated any security protocols," Sarah said carefully. "I'm not suggesting you have," Admiral Walsh replied. "But given the level of interest in your background, we think it might be beneficial for you to have a conversation with someone from our Transition Assistance Program. Sometimes situations like this can be managed more effectively with proper guidance." The call ended with an agreement for Sarah to meet with a Navy liaison officer over the weekend. As she hung up the phone, Sarah realized that her quiet civilian life was about to become much more complicated. That same day, Morrison was conducting his own investigation from a different angle. His contact at the Veterans Administration had been helpful, but Morrison needed more specific information to understand exactly what kind of employee Thompson Industries had stumbled upon through a series of carefully worded inquiries and professional networking. Morrison eventually connected with someone who could provide context without violating security protocols: Colonel Marcus Rivera, a retired Army Special Forces officer who now worked as a defense contractor. "I can't tell you specifics about any individual service record," Rivera explained during their phone conversation. "But I can tell you generally about the kind of people who serve in naval special operations, particularly those with the classification levels you've described." "I'm just trying to understand what we're dealing with," Morrison said. This employee's capabilities seemed far beyond what her resume would suggest. Rivera was quiet for a moment before responding. "If someone served 8 years in naval special operations with classified service records, and if they were discharged honorably with full benefits, then you're dealing with someone who was very good at a very dangerous job." "How dangerous?" "The kind of dangerous where people don't come home if they're not very good at what they do," Rivera said bluntly. "These aren't people who pushed papers or maintained equipment. These are people who operated in hostile environments, made life-or-death decisions under extreme pressure, and were trusted with missions that most people can't even imagine." Morrison absorbed this information. "And the transition to civilian life?" "Challenging," Rivera admitted. "The skills translate in some ways, but the environment is completely different. Some adapt well, others struggle. But if someone like that is excelling in a civilian role, it means they've successfully made the transition, and you should probably be grateful to have them." After the call ended, Morrison sat in his office contemplating the implications. Thompson Industries had hired what appeared to be an elite special operations veteran for a mid-level logistics position, and then allowed a mediocre manager to harass her nearly to the breaking point. It was a failure of management and human resources that could have cost the company an exceptional employee. Meanwhile, Sarah was dealing with her own complications. The Navy liaison officer, Lieutenant Commander Janet Brooks, met her at a coffee shop near Sarah's apartment on Saturday morning. "Sarah, I want you to understand that you're not in any trouble," Brooks began. "But your employer's inquiries have raised some flags about operational security and the protection of classified information." "I haven't disclosed anything inappropriate," Sarah insisted. "I've been extremely careful about what I've said about my service." "I believe you," Brooks replied. But the situation has apparently escalated to the point where your background is under corporate investigation. We need to get ahead of this before it becomes a bigger problem. Brooks explained that the Navy was prepared to provide Thompson Industries with a sanitized version of Sarah's service record that would confirm her qualifications, without revealing classified details. It would include her rank at discharge, general areas of specialization, and commendations that were public record. It will show that you were a decorated special operations veteran with extensive leadership experience and advanced training in logistics, operations coordination, and crisis management, Brooks said. Basically, it will confirm that you're overqualified for your current position. Sarah considered this carefully. And what are the potential consequences? Professionally? Probably very positive. Employers generally value veterans with proven leadership capabilities. Personally? It might mean more attention and questions than you're comfortable with. That evening, Sarah called her older brother Miguel, a police detective in San Diego who was the only family member who knew the full details of her military service. They're starting to dig into my background, Sarah told him. I'm not sure how much I want them to know. Sis, you can't hide who you are forever, Miguel replied. Maybe it's time to stop pretending to be less than you are. I'm not pretending to be anything. I just want to have a normal job and a quiet life. But that's not working out, is it? Some guy has been making your life miserable because he thinks you're just another employee he can push around. Maybe if he knew he was messing with someone who could probably take apart his entire security system with her eyes closed, he'd have thought twice. Miguel's words stayed with Sarah through the weekend as she weighed her options. On Monday morning, she found Morrison waiting by her desk with a serious expression. Sarah, we need to talk. Conference room, please. This time, the meeting included Rebecca Chun and a man Sarah didn't recognize, tall, silver-haired, wearing an expensive suit that suggested senior executive status. Sarah, this is Michael Thompson, our CEO, Morrison said by way of introduction. He wanted to meet you personally. Thompson extended his hand with a warm smile. Ms. Martinez, I want to apologize on behalf of the company for what you've experienced here. The treatment you've received from Mr. Davidson was completely unacceptable. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. Thompson sat down across from her. I also want you to know that our investigation has revealed some interesting information about your background. We've been in contact with Navy Personnel Command to verify your service record. Sarah kept her expression neutral, but internally she was preparing for whatever was coming next. It appears we've significantly underutilized your capabilities, Thompson continued. Your actual qualifications and experience are far beyond what your current position requires. Morrison opened a folder and slid it across the table. This is a sanitized summary of your service record, provided by the Navy. It makes for very impressive reading. Sarah glanced at the document. It included her final rank of Petty Officer First Class, her specialization in special operations, logistics, and coordination, 3 commendations for exceptional service, and confirmation of her clearance levels. It was enough to give a civilian employer a clear picture of her capabilities without revealing classified details. So you were Navy Special Operations? Thompson said. That explains quite a lot about how you've handled this situation and your performance in our logistics department. Yes, sir. I served for 8 years before deciding to transition to civilian life. Thompson leaned forward. Sarah, I'm going to be direct with you. We clearly made a mistake in how we've managed your employment here. We hired someone with your background for a position that doesn't begin to utilize your skills and experience. Rebecca consulted her notes. We'd like to discuss some immediate changes. First, we're terminating Mr. Davidson's employment effective today. Second, we're offering you his position as department manager. Sarah was stunned. She had expected consequences for Davidson, but not a promotion for herself. Additionally, Thompson continued, we're prepared to offer you a significant salary increase, better benefits, and a formal apology for the treatment you've experienced. Morrison added, We've also identified several process improvements and efficiency initiatives that could benefit from someone with your operational background. This could be the beginning of a very different career path. Sarah sat quietly for a moment, processing the offer. The promotion would mean better pay, more responsibility, and the authority to prevent other employees from experiencing what she had endured. "I appreciate the offer," she said finally. "Can I have some time to consider it?" "Of course," Thompson replied. "But I hope you'll seriously consider staying with us. The company needs people with your character and capabilities in leadership positions." 3 months later, Sarah stood before a mirror in her apartment, adjusting the collar of her new business suit. Today marked her first quarterly review as Department Manager of Logistics, and she was preparing for a presentation to the Board of Directors about the transformation of her department's operations. The changes had been dramatic. Under her leadership, shipping errors had dropped by 65%. Customer satisfaction scores had reached company records, and the department had saved Thompson Industries over $2 million through process improvements and strategic vendor negotiations. More importantly, the toxic culture that had festered under Davidson's management had been completely eliminated. Sarah's phone rang as she was gathering her presentation materials. The caller ID showed Lieutenant Commander Brooks from the Navy Liaison Office. "Sarah, I wanted to check in and see how things are going," Brooks said. "It's been 3 months since we last spoke, and I wanted to make sure everything was working out well." "Better than I expected," Sarah replied honestly. "The promotion has worked out very well, and I feel like I'm finally using my skills in a meaningful way." "That's wonderful to hear. Have you given any thought to the other opportunities we discussed?" Brooks was referring to several offers Sarah had received once word of her background became known in the corporate community. Defense contractors, government agencies, and private security firms had all expressed interest in hiring someone with her unique combination of military experience and proven civilian management skills. "I'm happy where I am," Sarah said. "Thompson Industries has become a good fit for me." "I'm glad to hear that. You deserve to be in a place that appreciates your capabilities." After the call ended, Sarah drove to the office, reflecting on how much her life had changed. The transformation hadn't been easy. Taking over Davidson's department had meant dealing with lingering resentments, establishing new procedures, and proving herself as a leader rather than just a skilled individual contributor. But the work had been deeply satisfying in ways she hadn't expected. Building a high-performing team, solving complex operational challenges, and seeing the positive impact of her leadership reminded her of the best aspects of military service without the life-or-death pressure that had ultimately led to her decision to leave at Thompson Industries. Sarah had found something she hadn't even realized she was looking for. A way to serve and lead that didn't require her to carry a weapon or risk. Her life in hostile territories. Her presentation to the board went exceptionally well. The directors were impressed not only with the department's improved performance, but with Sarah's strategic vision for further improvements. CEO Michael Thompson had introduced her by saying, "Sarah Martinez represents exactly the kind of leadership and innovation that will drive our company's future growth." After the meeting, Morrison approached her in the hallway. "Outstanding presentation," he said. The board was clearly impressed. "Thank you. The team deserves most of the credit. They've embraced the changes and worked very hard to implement the new procedures." Morrison smiled. "That's exactly the kind of response I'd expect from someone with your background. But don't sell yourself short. Leadership matters, and you've provided exactly what this department needed." They walked together toward the logistics department, where Sarah could see her team working efficiently in an environment that now emphasized collaboration rather than competition. "I have to admit," Morrison continued, "when we first hired you, I don't think anyone expected you to have the kind of impact you've had. We thought we were getting a competent logistics coordinator. Instead, we discovered we had hired a transformational leader." Sarah appreciated the recognition, but she was more proud of what her team had accomplished than her individual success. The potential was always there. Sometimes organizations just need someone to unlock it. The afternoon brought a different kind of satisfaction. Sarah was conducting a one-on-one meeting with Jennifer Walsh, a young woman who had recently been hired as a logistics analyst. Jennifer was smart and ambitious, but she had been struggling with confidence issues, particularly in meetings with male colleagues from other departments. "I feel like they don't take me seriously," Jennifer confided. "When I present analysis or make suggestions, it's like they're looking right through me. But when Tom Jenkins says exactly the same thing, suddenly it's a brilliant insight." Sarah recognized the frustration immediately. It was a variation of challenges she had faced throughout her career, both military and civilian. "Jennifer, let me tell you something I learned the hard way," Sarah said. "You can't control how other people perceive you initially, but you can control how they perceive you over time. Competence and consistency are more powerful than any bias, but you have to be patient and strategic about demonstrating both. How do you deal with people who dismiss you before you even open your mouth?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "You prepare twice as hard as you think you need to. You document everything. You build alliances with people who do recognize your capabilities. And you never, ever let someone else's limitations define your own potential." Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. "Is that how you handled Mr. Davidson?" The question reminded Sarah of how far she had come. Davidson's harassment felt like ancient history now, though it had only been a few months since his termination. "Davidson was an extreme case," Sarah replied. "But yes, the principles are the same. I didn't let his insecurities and prejudices determine my value or my future." As the day ended, Sarah found herself staying late to review plans for the next quarter. The office was nearly empty except for a few other managers working on their own projects. She appreciated the quiet time to think and plan without interruptions. Tom Jenkins stopped by her office before leaving. "Sarah, I wanted to thank you again for recommending me for the senior analyst position," he said. "I know I wouldn't have gotten that promotion under the old management." "You earned it through your work and your integrity," Sarah replied. "I just made sure the right people noticed." Jenkins paused in the doorway. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Do you ever miss it? Your military service, I mean." "This is a good job, but it must be pretty different from what you did before." Sarah considered the question, something she had been asking herself frequently lately. "I miss parts of it," she said honestly. "I miss the sense of mission, the camaraderie, the feeling that every day's work had clear purpose and importance." "And do you find that here?" Sarah looked around her office, then out at the empty department where her team would return tomorrow to continue building something positive and productive. "More than I expected to," she admitted. "We're not saving lives or protecting national security, but we're building something worthwhile. We're creating an environment where people can do their best work, where merit matters more than politics, and where everyone has the opportunity to contribute and grow." Jenkins smiled. "That sounds like a pretty important mission to me." After he left, Sarah finished her planning for the next day and prepared to head home. As she was gathering her things, her phone buzzed with a text message from her brother Miguel. "Saw the article about Thompson Industries logistics improvements in the trade journal. Proud of you, sis. You found your place." Sarah smiled as she read the message. Miguel was right. After months of trying to hide from her past and minimize her capabilities, she had finally found a place where she could be fully herself, where her military experience was an asset rather than something to downplay, where her leadership skills could make a real difference, and where she could build the kind of team and culture that she was proud to be part of. Walking to her car in the parking lot, Sarah reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought her to this point. She had come to Thompson Industries hoping to blend in and avoid attention. Instead, she had been forced to stand up for herself, reveal her true capabilities, and ultimately transform not just her own career but an entire department. The experience had taught her that hiding from who you are isn't protection, it's a limitation. Her military service, her specialized training, and her hard-earned leadership experience weren't burdens to be concealed. They were strengths to be leveraged in service of something larger than herself. As she drove home through the city lights, Sarah Martinez, former Navy SEAL, current department manager, and future leader, began planning the next phase of her mission, building an organization that would serve as a model for what was possible when people were valued for their capabilities rather than judged by their differences. The war was over, but the mission continued. And for the first time since leaving the military, Sarah was exactly where she belonged.